I was just finishing my late-night coffee when the doorbell rang, its chime sounding more like a note played backward than anything recognizable. Opening the door, I found a woman standing there who looked almost human, tall, slender, hair like spun silver, but with ears that stretched past her shoulders, delicate and pointed, moving subtly as if listening to sounds I couldn't even hear. She smiled at me, and the curve of her lips made my brain forget common sense. "I might not survive your hospitality," she said casually, and I blinked. I laughed, part nervous, part disbelief. Who warns a guest about their own potential death before inviting them inside? She extended a hand, and despite my better judgment, I shook it. Her grip was firm but not crushing, and her touch sent a faint warmth up my arm, like static electricity made friendly. She introduced herself as Lyria, her voice lilting in ways that made certain syllables linger too long, like notes of a song that shouldn't exist on Earth. I tried to respond with a joke, something about alien abductions and insurance policies, but my humor sounded hollow even to my own ears. She chuckled anyway, a musical sound that made me wonder if humans were supposed to have more fun with death threats than I thought. We left my apartment, and I realized she didn't just walk. She glided, each step light, almost floating, and I found myself hustling to keep up. Her ship was parked down the street, a sleek thing that resembled molten black glass but reflected the city lights like liquid mirrors. I stumbled over a sidewalk crack and muttered something about human clumsiness. She laughed, her long ears twitching like cat's whiskers, and said, "Don't worry, your species' inefficiency is charming." I wanted to argue, but the streetlight caught the glint of her eyes, and I decided survival might depend more on smiling than on sensibility. Inside the ship, gravity seemed to negotiate with itself. I took a cautious step forward, and my feet barely touched the floor before lifting slightly. She floated beside me, steady as if she had rehearsed this movement for a lifetime. I tried to steady my coffee in midair, failed spectacularly, and watched it float upward in a lazy spiral, much to my horror. "You always serve coffee with acrobatics?" she asked, a smirk playing on her lips. I grabbed it just before it hit the ceiling, dripping, and muttered something about caffeine being a survival necessity. She laughed again. The interior of the ship was a kaleidoscope of colors that shifted as though the walls themselves were breathing. Panels slid open to reveal floating spheres of light, each rotating gently and emitting faint hums that made the air feel alive. I reached out, and a sphere responded to my touch, splitting into three smaller lights that danced around my hand. "Oh, I see your curiosity survived the warning," she said. I forced a grin. "Curiosity is my middle name," I joked, and she rolled her eyes in a very alien way that somehow made me feel simultaneously clever and ridiculous. We moved through corridors that bent at impossible angles, and I caught myself bumping into walls that weren't really walls. I laughed at my own disorientation. "So, you're testing my spatial awareness?" I asked. She shook her head, pretending offense. "I'm merely offering a tour with optional thrills," she said. "Thrills that may or may not include temporary dismemberment, but you look sturdy enough for that, I think." I swallowed hard, reminded suddenly of her warning. She noticed, of course, and smirked. "Relax, human. Most of the time the furniture isn't alive." We entered what she called the common chamber. It was enormous, with a ceiling that shimmered like a starfield and floors that alternated between soft luminescent tiles and what appeared to be liquid mirrors. A small creature popped out from under one of the tiles, a floating jelly-like thing with three blinking eyes. I jumped and she laughed so hard her ears twitched violently. "Meet Glip. He likes to startle humans. It's his hobby." Glip floated toward me and gave what I can only describe as a friendly nuzzle before zooming back under the floor. I took a deep breath. "Your pets are terrifyingly cute," I said, and she pretended to scribble notes on an invisible pad, nodding solemnly. She offered me something to eat, a translucent orb that hovered on a tiny platform. "Eat or don't eat. I won't judge, but your stomach might," she warned. I poked it with my finger, it floated away, teasing me. Finally, I bit into it, and flavors I didn't even have names for exploded across my senses. It's delicious, I said, unsure how to describe it. She winked. Human palate adaptation is always entertaining. Time moved strangely. One moment I thought minutes had passed, the next it felt like hours. She seemed unaffected, moving through her home with ease, slipping between floating staircases and walls that curved without warning. I followed, slipping occasionally, which she found endlessly amusing. I must admit, I said, trying to regain some dignity after tumbling over a levitating orb. This is the most dangerous tour I've ever taken where nothing has tried to kill me yet. She leaned close, her long ears brushing my shoulder. Dangerous is a matter of perspective, human, and humor is a matter of survival. As the night deepened, I began to understand that her warning wasn't entirely literal, or at least survival didn't mean just avoiding death. It meant keeping pace with the bizarre, laughing at near catastrophes, and trusting someone who might just be as unpredictable as the gravity-defying corridors we navigated. I realized that if I survived this evening, I might come out wiser, or at least more adept at dodging floating coffee cups. She caught my gaze, her expression teasing but serious, and said, "Welcome to my home, human. The adventure has only begun." I nodded, uncertain whether to laugh, faint, or both, and followed her deeper into a world that defied everything I thought possible. We walked deeper into her home, and the corridors started to mock my sense of direction. One moment, a hallway stretched out like it was infinite. The next, it bent sharply, folding over itself like a ribbon. I caught myself walking into what looked like a wall and discovered it was a mirror that reflected my panicked expression. "Ah, your first encounter with reflective surfaces," she said, amused. Her long ears twitched as she observed me, and I swear they were reading my thoughts, or at least judging my coordination. I waved at my own reflection, and she laughed, a light, musical sound that made me relax slightly, though my pride had taken a hit. She led me into a room where gravity played tricks like a mischievous child. I stepped onto a floating platform, and my feet hovered an inch above the floor. She hopped on another platform opposite me, arms crossed, as if she was balancing the universe itself. "Your species seems to enjoy clinging to the ground," she teased. I stumbled, flailed, and caught the edge of a hovering rail. "I prefer controlled chaos," I said, trying to sound confident. She shook her head, grinning. "Controlled chaos. I'll remember that." And then she launched herself forward with a flick of her legs, her long ears streaming behind her like ribbons in zero gravity. I tried to follow and ended up spinning slowly in midair, bumping gently into a glowing orb that hovered lazily in the center of the room. The orb emitted a soft, amused hum as if it had been waiting for me to mess up. After a few moments of aerial gymnastics, she landed lightly on another platform, arms on her hips. "Impressive," she said, "for someone who almost collided with three walls, a mirror, and a sentient orb." I panted, trying to maintain some dignity. "I call it strategic improvisation," I said, and she laughed, a sound that echoed strangely in the room, like a melody bouncing between invisible walls. "Strategic improvisation. Another note for the human dossier," she said, and I realized she was cataloging my every move, probably for amusement or research, or both. We drifted into another chamber, and I nearly tripped over what looked like a staircase made entirely of liquid light. Each step rippled and pulsed beneath my weight. I hesitated, and she rolled her eyes. "Don't overthink it. The steps are polite, they won't swallow you, probably." I laughed, took a deep breath, and stepped carefully. The liquid shimmered beneath my boots, bending light and colors in ways that made the room feel alive. At the top, I nearly fell again when a small creature with wings like translucent fans zipped past my face, leaving a trail of sparkling dust. She waved at it and said, "Ignore the glitter bugs. They're harmless unless you're allergic to beauty." We arrived at a vast chamber filled with floating objects, each object spinning lazily and humming faintly. Some looked like musical instruments, others like miniature planets, and a few like cubes of glass with swirling storms inside. I reached out to touch one, and it immediately split into three smaller replicas, orbiting my fingers like playful satellites. She watched me closely, amusement dancing in her eyes. "You're curious," she observed, "but careful enough not to break anything yet." Human caution balanced with reckless interest, interesting combination. I grinned. "I like to think of it as disciplined curiosity," I said. She laughed again, a sound that made the floating lights flicker in rhythm. She guided me through corridors that twisted impossibly, each turn revealing a new marvel. One door opened to a library where books floated gently, each page displaying words in languages I didn't recognize. I reached out to touch one, and the letters rearranged themselves into English sentences, forming jokes about alien bureaucracy. I chuckled. "So even the books have humor." She nodded. "Of course. Knowledge without amusement is just dangerous." Another room contained a fountain that defied physics, water flowing upward, forming twisting spires before returning to a glowing basin. I tried to drink from it, only to realize the liquid tasted like a perfect blend of flavors I couldn't identify, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, just stimulating. She winked. "Nutrients or novelty, take your pick." At one point, we encountered a platform suspended over a glowing void. She gestured for me to step forward. "Nothing to worry about. The platform won't drop you, but your dignity might," she said. I hesitated. "Dignity seems expendable," I muttered, stepping onto the floating surface. She joined me, hopping from edge to edge with the grace of someone born to defy gravity. I stumbled once, landed on my hands, and she laughed so hard that her long ears twitched violently, creating a soft breeze that ruffled my hair. I scrambled to stand, muttering about human adaptability and survival instinct, which she immediately called excessively amusing. As the night wore on, I realized that survival in her home wasn't about avoiding death. It was about keeping pace with the unexpected, embracing absurdity, and laughing when gravity, furniture, or sentient objects conspired against me. Her long ears twitched when she laughed, brushed the glowing railings, and sometimes seemed to sense my next move before I made it. I began to see that humor was part of her test. She was gauging my courage, my curiosity, and my willingness to let go of earthly rules, all while maintaining a veneer of amusement that made danger feel like a puzzle rather than a threat. Eventually, she led me to a central chamber, a room where the ceiling opened to reveal a swirl of stars suspended impossibly close, as though the galaxy itself had folded into her home. Platforms hovered around us, some carrying glowing orbs, others with curious creatures peeking at us. I stood in awe, realizing that her warning about survival wasn't about life and death. It was about navigating a reality that obeyed no familiar rules, where even the air seemed alive with intelligence. She extended a hand, her long ears brushing my shoulder. "Welcome to the core, human. This is where curiosity meets consequences," she said. I swallowed, a mixture of fear and excitement curling in my stomach. "I think I'm starting to understand," I said. She smirked. "Good. Understanding will help, humor will help more. And surviving, well, that's optional but highly recommended." By the time we sat on floating platforms for a brief pause, sipping liquids that defied description and tasted like both breakfast and rain, I realized that the night had only just begun. She teased, we laughed, and I began to suspect that this alien woman, her long ears twitching, eyes gleaming with amusement, was simultaneously my guide, my challenge, and my companion in a world that refused to make sense. And somehow, in this chaos of humor, impossible gravity, and unspoken tests, I felt a strange, thrilling sense of belonging. We drifted deeper into the heart of her home, the corridors twisting like ribbons of light and shadow. Each step felt like entering another layer of a dream, and I was beginning to accept that reality here didn't follow the rules I knew. Platforms floated lazily in midair, some carrying glowing orbs, others carrying small creatures that darted around like living comets. I stumbled on one, almost losing my balance, and she reached out with a gentle wave of her hand, using a faint magnetic pulse to steady me. "See, survival can be assisted," she said, smirking. Her long ears twitched, brushing a nearby glowing rail, and I realized that part of her warning wasn't about death, it was about adaptation. We reached a circular chamber at the center of the home. The ceiling above opened into a swirling galaxy, stars stretching in impossible patterns, nebulae casting colorful shadows over the floor. It was breathtaking, but I caught a hint of tension in her gaze, subtle, almost imperceptible. I had spent the night laughing at gravity-defying floors, teasing jelly-like creatures and floating platforms, but here, it seemed that even humor had its limits. She gestured to a platform hovering over a void that glimmered with starlight. "Time for a real test," she said. I gulped. The task was simple in description but terrifying in execution. Cross the platform and retrieve a small orb suspended above the void, then return. "No problem," I said, trying to sound confident. My first step sent me wobbling as the platform shifted slightly under my weight. She floated beside me, arms crossed, watching with an amused glint in her eyes. "Remember," she said, "panic is allowed, but dramatic flailing is optional." I laughed nervously, using humor to mask the tension curling in my stomach. Halfway across, I slipped. I shouted, expecting to fall, but instead, a soft force lifted me just enough to regain balance. She had anticipated it, of course. "Your survival isn't entirely accidental," she teased, her long ears brushing the glowing void below. "You've learned something, human. Observation matters more than brute strength here." I reached the orb, feeling a surge of exhilaration as I grasped it. The return trip was easier, my movements more deliberate, my confidence growing with every careful step. Humor became my shield. I made jokes about floating awkwardly in alien physics, and she laughed, her amusement easing my own tension. When I finally placed the orb on its pedestal, the chamber shifted. Walls that had seemed solid turned into translucent panels, revealing her home's entire structure. Corridors, chambers, floating gardens, and countless orbs glowing faintly. I realized then that my journey through her home wasn't just a physical challenge but a lesson in trust and perception. She approached me, her long ears brushing my shoulder. "You've done well," she said, "not just surviving but understanding. Humor, curiosity, observation. You've adapted faster than I expected." I nodded, realizing how much I had changed. The fear I'd felt at her doorstep had been replaced by cautious confidence, a willingness to embrace the unpredictable, and a new appreciation for laughter as a tool for survival. She led me back through the corridors, and I noticed details I had missed before. Floating lights that seemed to respond to emotion, small creatures observing us quietly, panels that displayed faint constellations as if recording our journey. I laughed when I tripped over a levitating cube, and she laughed with me, the sound echoing like wind chimes in a crystal cave. "You've grown," she said, "not just in skill but in perspective. You've learned that survival here isn't just avoiding harm. It's reading the world, embracing it, and finding joy even in danger." As we reached the chamber near the entrance of her home, she paused. "Most humans would have turned back by now," she said. "Some wouldn't have laughed once, others would have fled at the first floating staircase." I smiled, realizing she was right. "I think I would have missed the fun if I had," I admitted. She nodded, a rare seriousness touching her features before breaking into a mischievous grin. "Fun is essential. Without it, even the safest path is unbearable." She led me back to the ship that had brought me here, and I noticed how different I felt from the man who had opened his door hours ago. My heart was still racing from the night's adventures, but it wasn't fear. It was exhilaration, curiosity, and a sense of accomplishment. I had laughed at peril, navigated the impossible, and earned her quiet respect. "I might actually survive this," I joked, and she tilted her head, her ears flicking. "Perhaps, or perhaps you'll survive changed. Either way, it's a success." As we ascended back to the city below, the ship moving with silent grace, I realized that her home and her challenges had shifted something inside me. I had learned to read cues, trust intuition, embrace absurdity, and find joy even when reality seemed hostile. Humor had become my armor, curiosity my compass, and adaptability my guide. She had warned me about survival, but I now understood. Surviving her world wasn't about clinging to the familiar, but about dancing with the unknown and laughing through it. When the ship landed, I stepped onto the familiar sidewalk with a mixture of relief and lingering awe. She watched me from the doorway, her long ears catching the city lights like delicate sails. "You'll do well," she said. "If you ever need another lesson or just more fun, you know where to find me." I nodded, smiling. I think I understand now. Surviving isn't enough. Living, laughing, adapting, that's the real challenge. She winked, and for a moment the impossible glow of her presence made the city feel small and ordinary. As I walked away, I realized how much I had changed. The man who had answered her door hours ago would have been paralyzed by fear, cautious, hesitant, overwhelmed by the unknown. The man